Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the Sarah Lawrence sex cult scandal.
Isabella Pollok was the only co-defendant that prosecutors charged with Larry Ray in the sensational college sex cult case.
Law and Crime's Adam Klasfeld is at the federal courthouse as Isabella Pollok enters a plea. And could Elizabeth Holmes receive a new trial? Why the convicted fraudster says she deserves one. Plus, a music journalist credited with breaking the R. Kelly scandal fights a defense subpoena requiring him to testify. And later, the death of Eliza Fletcher. The heiress's accused murderer appears in court for a second arraignment. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome, everybody, to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber, in for Brian Buckmeyer. Larry Ray's only co-defendant in the so-called Sarah Lawrence sex cult case pleads guilty to her role in the scheme. Law and Crime Network managing editor Adam Klasfeld was in the courtroom when Isabella Pollok entered a plea.
This is the Daniel Patrick Moynihan courthouse in the background, where just hours earlier, 15 stories high, we had the sole co-defendant in the Larry Ray Sarah Lawrence sex cult case plead guilty to a charge of conspiring against the United States by laundering Larry Ray's money. The object of the money laundering conspiracy was hiding the proceeds of sex trafficking and extortion. And Isabella Pollok, 31 years old, admitted to that count in court. Isabella Pollok was the only co-defendant that prosecutors charged with Larry Ray in the sensational college sex cult case. One of Larry Ray's victims, Claudia Drury, testified that she made $2.5 million in enforced prostitution, had to turn over the proceeds to Larry Ray, and Isabella Pollok, by her guilty plea today, admitted to being part of that conspiracy to extort Larry Ray's victims and to sexually traffic Claudia Drury. She is going to be sentenced in February. The maximum penalty that she's facing is 5 years in jail. And that is also her federal sentencing guidelines, 5 years of imprisonment. This is Adam Klasfeld for the Law and Crime Network.
All right, joining us today is co-host Terry Austin and criminal defense attorney Marie Pereira. Great to have you both here. Marie, I'll start with you. You know, we don't often see defendants plead guilty. Why do you think she pled guilty here?
Because she got the sweetest deal ever. She sat down with her attorneys and they probably told her exactly what they had against her, all the evidence that the prosecutors wanted to present against her at trial. And there probably was a very meticulous money trail proving that she assisted him in hiding the money. And so she did what was best, and she pled guilty based on advice from her counsel.
Terry, Marie's making a good point. I mean, Larry Ray was found guilty of 15 counts, including sex trafficking, and he faces a mandatory minimum of 15 years, a maximum sentence of life. Do you think 5 years for Pollok, given everything that she did, is fair?
I don't. I think she should have gotten more, considering the nature of the crime. Look, she pled guilty to conspiracy to money laundering, but the underlying crimes that she was supporting with that plea were sex trafficking and extortion. Those are very serious crimes. She was actually considered Ray's top lieutenant, and there was so much evidence against her. They had witness testimony, financial records. They even had videos, and so I definitely think they should have thrown the book at her, even though the sentence is consistent with the guidelines. I think that there was room here to go even higher, and quite frankly, I think that all in all, it's fair, but I don't think that it's sufficient. This was something that we want to try to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and there are these kind of eerie similarities when you talk about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And look, you know, pleading guilty, you save the expense and the heartache of a trial as well. And I think that has to become into consideration as well when you talk about the sensitivities and the trauma of this kind of case. Well, children and teachers returned to school for a new year in Uvalde, Texas, nearly 4 months after a gunman entered Robb Elementary School with a rifle and killed 21 students and faculty. It was the deadliest school massacre in almost a decade when 19 students and 2 teachers were shot and killed by an 18-year-old gunman on May 24th earlier this year. Students returning for the new year will not be resuming classes inside Robb Elementary, as there are plans in place to tear down the building, and many students and teachers have been spread out among other Uvalde School District buildings. Some second and third graders have left the school district entirely, while others receive scholarships for nearby private schools. And this all comes as 5 Department of Public Safety officers are being investigated and 2 have been suspended following the heavily scrutinized police response to the shooting, as law enforcement waited over an hour to engage with the gunman. The Office of Inspector General will determine if the officers in fact violated policy. Nearly 400 law enforcement officers responded to the massacre. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the defense continues its case as disgraced R&B singer R. Kelly stands federal trial in Illinois. But first, could Elizabeth Holmes receive a new trial? Ahead of the former Theranos CEO sentencing, Holmes petitions the court for a new trial. Welcome back, everybody. Theranos fraudster Elizabeth Holmes is demanding a new trial. This comes after a bombshell claim that a prosecution witness showed up to her house to say he regretted his testimony. In January, Holmes was convicted of federal fraud charges. She had claimed that her biotech company would revolutionize medicine, but it turned out to be a giant fraud, which scammed several people out of millions of dollars. In a new court filing, Holmes' attorney says that a former Theranos lab director, who was a key witness for the government at her trial, went to her home in early August unannounced. He reportedly claims his testimony had been twisted by prosecutors and that he tried to answer honestly, but says the government tried to make everyone look bad. Holmes' attorney argues this warrants a new trial, or at the very least, an evidentiary hearing to call the lab director to testify about his concerns. The former CEO has yet to be sentenced. That's scheduled to happen September 26th. Holmes faces up to 20 years behind bars and up to $250,000 plus restitution for each count. Terry, so you have this key government witness, now has a change of heart. Is that enough to overturn the conviction, get a new trial?
Jesse, as my law school professor used to say, too bad, so sad. It is not a grounds for getting a new trial. Listen, the grounds for an appeal are relatively limited in a case like this. You can have legal error, obviously, meaning that some evidence was improperly admitted, or, you can have jury instructions that weren't quite correct or that weren't included. You can have jury misconduct. None of that exists here. I mean, you can even have ineffective assistance of counsel resulting in some sort of legal error. We don't have that here. All we have is a witness who theoretically was supposed to be testifying truthfully. So as long as he testified truthfully, he can now claim that it's not right, it's not fair. The prosecution has a right to argue the case. And again, too bad, so sad. You should have talked to the prosecution beforehand.
I mean, I've never heard it before. And Marie, you focus on Holmes for a second. She was found guilty of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, plus 3 counts of wire fraud. She faces up to 20 years behind bars for each count. Do you think the imposition of the maximum sentence would be justified here?
I don't think it would be, but then again, there will be a pre-plea sentencing report, and probation is going to interview her. They're going to look at her criminal history. They're going to interview her, the victims that potentially were impacted by this big lie, and the judge is going to have to come up with a number. I don't think max is going to be what happens to her, simply because she just doesn't have an extensive criminal history.
I'd say I agree with you, but I have been surprised before, aka the Harvey Weinstein trial with 23 years in prison, when you really didn't have that kind of criminal record. Obviously a very different case, but this is also a very different case, a kind of a fraud that we've never really heard like this before. So we'll wait and see how much time she will spend behind bars. Well, over now in New York, former advisor to President Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, is expected to turn himself into prosecutors Thursday to face a new criminal indictment. The state charges reportedly stem from previous federal charges that Trump had pardoned him for surrounding fundraising and an alleged defrauding of donors for the We Build the Wall campaign. He was accused of pocketing $1 million in the alleged scheme. Presidential pardons only apply to federal charges, so Bannon can be charged at the state level. This all comes weeks after the former top strategist was convicted of contempt of Congress for refusing to cooperate with the White House committee investigating the January 6 U.S. Capitol attack, and that he ignored a congressional subpoena that he was legally obligated to answer. Switching now to Nevada, where Las Vegas officials released new images of the suspect connected with a veteran reporter's stabbing death. 69-year-old Jeff German, a veteran reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, was found stabbed to death outside of his home on September 3rd. Authorities received a 911 phone call at about 10:30 that morning. The next day, a medical examiner determined German died of, quote, multiple sharp force injuries, ruling his death a homicide. Police believe German got into an altercation with someone that resulted in the stabbing. They also say that the suspect was likely casing the neighborhood to commit other crimes. Since German's death, the Las Vegas Police Department has released a series of images they believe are connected to the murder. The photos and videos show a person wearing what appears to be a straw hat and an orange reflective jacket you see right there. And surveillance video also shows a maroon GMC Yukon Denali that police say could be connected to the crime. Investigators are now working to identify the person in the video and the owner of the vehicle. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, back-to-back court hearings for the Tennessee man investigators say abducted and murdered an heiress schoolteacher. Plus, a longtime reporter covering the R. Kelly case argues he shouldn't have to take the stand. We take a closer look at the writer's argument. Welcome back. R. Kelly's defense picks up their case in the federal sex crimes trial as the judge rules a former Chicago Sun-Times journalist will not have to testify for the defense. 55-year-old Kelly, a convicted sex offender, now stands trial in Illinois on federal sex crimes charges. Back in 2008, the singer was acquitted of charges for creating a video of himself having sex with a 14-year-old. Now, at the time, the alleged victim and her family denied their involvement, but 16 years later, the accuser and her mother testified for the prosecution, saying they lied about their involvement after Kelly threatened them. Reporter Jim Derogators has followed Kelly's case for years, saying he anonymously received a video that helped lead to Kelly's 2008 child pornography trial. That same video has been entered as evidence in Kelly's current federal trial. In court documents filed Tuesday, Derogators argued that he shouldn't have to testify for the defense, and on Wednesday, the case's judge agreed. Also on Wednesday, Kelly's former business manager and co-defendant Darrell McDavid took the stand. McDavid testified that he didn't believe early sexual assault allegations about Kelly, saying it was the cost of doing business in the entertainment industry. Well, Marie, the judge ruled that Derogators didn't have to testify because the tape was already authenticated by another witness. Is that standard operating procedure? Is that the right decision?
It's the right decision, and generally appellate courts have ruled forcing a journalist to testify about cases they've covered should be a rare and last resort. In this case, it's already been authenticated, so the chain of custody issues don't exist, and it would be pointless to force him to testify. And you know what? There was also an issue of safety on the 2008 trial where Kelly was acquitted. He testified in that case and received death threats. So why put the man through that again?
Terry, this trial is a lot different, right? So you have Darrell McDavid. He's a co-defendant in this case. He testified that he didn't believe the claims against Kelly were true. You think the jury should just trust him? I mean, this is an important witness.
Listen, if I'm sitting in that jury, I am definitely going to be skeptical of McDavid's testimony. Remember, he's Kelly's former business manager. So he was part and parcel of everything that went on. Like you said, he testified that he thought those early accusations were extortion, and the fact that many of the cases were settled and it was less than the original demand, he thought that that meant they were definitely not true. And I think it's callous for him to go on to say that it was something as, simple as the cost of doing business. Basically, it's saying that you can do anything you want as long as you can get it paid off. So I think that jury should be careful. They're going to get a jury instruction that says the witness, depending on his relationship, could very well have somebody.
It's an interesting argument that we've actually heard before in these kinds of cases. So yeah, we'll see how it shakes up. Heading south to Florida, where investigators say a couple lured a 14-year-old into their apartment to play spin the bottle before sexually assaulting her. Investigators say 23-year-old Emmanuel Martinez and 18-year-old Jocelyn Gomez now face multiple charges, including sexual battery on a child over the age of 12 and lewd and lascivious exhibition on a child under age 16. Officials say Gomez knew the 14-year-old girl from school and originally invited her to go to the movies. When Gomez and Martinez picked the girl up from her home, they changed plans and instead went to their apartment. That's where investigators say the pair asked the girl to play spin the bottle. Officials say the pair pressured the girl to take off her clothes and kiss Martinez, which she denied. After that, Martinez allegedly forced the girl down and raped her as Gomez watched. The couple were arrested last Friday, and police say Martinez confessed to the crimes. When we come back, the murder of heiress, teacher, and mother Eliza Fletcher. The man accused of abducting Fletcher appears in court for the second time this week. But will he make bond? That's still ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Welcome back, everybody. Testimony resumed Wednesday in the California case of Paul and Ruben Flores as the father and son stand trial for the disappearance and death of Kristen Smart 26 years ago. The Cal Poly student went missing after a party in May of 1996, but the case went cold for 2 decades with very few leads. Paul and Ruben Flores were long suspected in the case and were arrested last year following several searches of their homes. Witnesses say Paul, who's charged with her murder, was the last person seen with Smart when he walked her home from the party. Paul's father, Ruben, is charged with accessory after the fact for allegedly helping hide the body and allegedly burying her in his backyard and later moving the remains. On Wednesday, the state continued presenting its case before 2 separate juries, one for Paul and another for Ruben. The day got off to a delayed start as a scheduled witness fell ill. Shelby Liddell, a forensic specialist, continued her testimony from last week, telling jurors about the excavations of soil taken from around Ruben's home last year after noticing a change in behavior from the cadaver dogs. And over in Tennessee, the man investigators say abducted and murdered a Memphis mother of 2 is being held without bond. 38-year-old Cleotha Abston appeared in Shelby County Court on Wednesday for the second arraignment this week. Abston was originally charged with kidnapping and tampering with evidence, but was later charged with first-degree murder when Fletcher's body was found. During Wednesday's court appearance, the case's judge revoked Abston's bond that had previously been set at $500,000. Investigators say 34-year-old Fletcher was last seen alive on Friday, September 2nd, just after 4 o'clock in the morning. Officials say she was out for a run when she was forced into a black SUV and taken away. Investigators later confirmed Abston was driving that vehicle. He was arrested on Saturday and charged in connection to Fletcher's disappearance. On Monday, Memphis area investigators discovered a body near where Abston was seen cleaning out his vehicle. On Tuesday, investigators confirmed that that body belonged to Fletcher. So far, a cause of death has not been made public. Abston is due back in court again on Thursday. Marie, at first, bond was set at $500,000, but that was revoked when the murder charge was added. Is it common for a judge to do this to revoke bail?
Absolutely, based on the nature of the evidence that's mounting against him. And it seems like the evidence is unrefutable. They have him on video. They recovered the vehicle. I'm sure they have a plethora of DNA evidence against him. Revoking that bail was in order. The judge had to do it.
So if you look at that, Terry, right, and you think about all the evidence against him, and you think about if he's convicted of everything across the board, what does he face in terms of prison time?
Listen, I think they're going to throw the book at him. He has a criminal record. He was actually accused of rape when he was a teenager. He has served 20 years for violently kidnapping a prosecutor of all people doing his or her job. That is something that is very serious. He was definitely let out of jail after serving the time. And you can argue that it's only fair that you allow someone after they've served their time to get out of jail. But here we see that he's committing really heinous crimes again. He's been charged with multiple crimes. He was charged with especially aggravated kidnapping, which is more in Tennessee than just regular kidnapping. You can actually get up to 60 years. You can get 15 to 60 years. That's a lot of time. And one of the other charges was tampering with evidence, which is obviously one of the minor charges. And he could also get life without parole or death for the murder charge. And I think the prosecution here is going to seek the maximum. There's no question that they want this man behind bars. They don't want to have him get out again with the possibility that he could commit yet another crime. And we know he already did. So I anticipate at the end of the day, if there's a conviction, and we have every reason to believe, like Marie said, there's a ton of evidence here that there will be a conviction. I think that unless there's a plea deal, we're going to see a request for death.
It is chilling, and we'll be curious to see if he actually takes a plea deal or this will head to trial. Marie, Terry, thank you both so much. Everyone out there, thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.